ACC drops the schedule for Florida State in its entirety last night at 9 p.m., and I've got some thoughts on it. Ultimately, I will say this. I'll preface this by saying I don't know how much when you play someone matters. It matters some, and I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but I don't know that it is the end-all be-all. Now, there are always some games you'd rather have at certain times of the year, like you don't necessarily want to go up to UVA late in the year and play that game in freezing cold temperatures. You don't necessarily want to play Clemson and Florida in back-to-back weeks. You wouldn't want to play Miami and Clemson in back-to-back weeks, and Florida State doesn't have to do any of that. But most of the time, when you play someone matters less than how you actually just go out and execute. I've never gotten to we do a lot of projecting early in the year, and when the schedule comes out and we talk about, oh man, if this game was here and this, that, and when the games get played, everyone's dealing with injuries, everyone's dealing with wear and tear, everyone's dealing with this, that, and the other, the flu, COVID, whatever. Everyone deals with those things. And so, yeah, would there be some games you'd like to have in different places? Yes. I've never gotten to game week and had the thought, oh man, I wish we were playing this game in 3 weeks and not today, right? So it's cool to talk about now. Impact when it really happens, probably somewhat minimal, but it's fun to project out now, right? And I do have a couple of complaints about the schedule. I think there are a couple of things about the schedule that do work out in Florida State's favor. Bama week 1, East Texas A&M week 2, a bye week in week 3, week 4, Kent State, week 5, UVA. October starts with Miami. Then you play Pitt. Then you've got Stanford on the road. You've got a bye week. Wake Forest to start November, at Clemson, Virginia Tech at home, at NC State, at UF. Certainly, November, a very tough month. 3 road games, 2 of them against really good teams, and then a trip to Raleigh on a Friday night, which I don't love the Friday stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech's very capable. Virginia Tech would have beaten Florida State this year, and we'll see how both teams match up later. That's your best chance for a win, in my opinion, in November. Not that you couldn't win one of the other 3, but certainly playing it at home at Doak with 2 weeks to go until Thanksgiving is probably your best shot. If you're betting on the Super Bowl, if you're betting on college basketball, if you're betting on tennis at 3 a.m. in another country, make sure you're doing it with BetUS. YouTube 150 gets you 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125 on your next 2. All of that up to $2,000. Use our code, again, YouTube 150 over at BetUS. Couple of thoughts quickly on the schedule. I hate the way the bye weeks are set up. I don't think they're advantageous to Florida State at all. I would have really liked to see an ACC game there in week 3. I don't really understand what the advantage or what the reason for putting a bye between East Texas A&M and Kent State is. I don't think you need additional time to prepare for either one of those teams. I don't think you need additional time to rest up after either one of those 2 teams, right? A bye between East Texas A&M and Kent State feels completely wasted to me, and I would have much preferred the ACC to give us an ACC game that weekend. I wouldn't even have cared if it was Miami. I wouldn't care if it was Clemson. I don't really care who it would have been. Anything would have been better to me than a bye. And then I would have loved, honestly, if you'd have just switched the UVA game and the Miami game, the UVA game and the bye, I would have loved to have the bye before Miami. Obviously, Miami's probably got some gripes about their schedule too. They have a bye before they play us and then a bye after they play us. That's really weird to have 2 byes within 3 weeks. But I don't love the way that our first bye is set up. And then to be very fair with you, I don't love the way the second bye is set up either. You play Pitt and then Stanford. I'd take the bye after Pitt or after Wake, but you've got Stanford, bye, Wake. 2 of the worst teams in the ACC. I know that we were the worst, but 2 of the worst teams in the ACC with really bad rosters. 2 games that Florida State will probably be favored in, even though one of them is on the road at Stanford. Again, I don't think you need extra time to recover from playing Stanford, and I don't think you need extra time to prepare for playing Wake. I would have much preferred to play Wake first and then had your bye before Clemson. Now, the ACC certainly wasn't going to give Florida State a bye before Clemson and not give Clemson a bye before playing Florida State. A lot of times that game is on the same weekend. It's not this year. A lot of times that game is on the same weekend as Florida, Georgia. Both Florida and Georgia always have a bye before playing each other. That's Florida's biggest conference game. I would like if the ACC would give us just kind of an understood bye before we play Clemson. A lot of times that is how it worked out back in the day when we were both in the same division. You knew that was the game of the year in the ACC. You knew the winner of that was probably going to go to the ACC championship, and more often than not would win the ACC championship, going to either the college football playoff, the BCS national championship, or at least the BCS or New Year's Six bowl game. And so I would have much preferred the bye to come after Wake as opposed to before it. Again, I think both byes set up are just kind of dumb. I don't think they're advantageous to Florida State at all. They're advantageous of, the wear and tear of a season and you get the bye week to rest. But I mean, everybody gets that. They're not strategic, right? Miami gets a bye before playing us. They have 2 weeks to prepare for us. We play on a Friday night. We get an extra day, a Friday night where we're on the road. Until you bake travel into that, I don't even know how much of an advantage it truly is. UF and Clemson in the same month is tough. In an ideal world, I would have liked to avoid that. I would have liked to have Clemson maybe in October, play Florida in November. That way you kind of have your 3 biggest games stacked. August, I guess, but essentially September having Bama, October having Clemson, November having Florida. That's not like a huge gripe, but ideally I think it could have been a little bit better if you didn't play Clemson in the same span as playing UF. I think back-to-back road trips at NC State and Florida are tough. Again, could have maybe avoided that by flipping some things around. You do get the extra day. That being on a Friday is a slight help, I guess, a Friday night in Raleigh as opposed to a Saturday where you lose the day of travel. I don't know. Friday nights in Raleigh seem like an absolute death wish, so we'll see how that goes down. I don't think this is the ACC screwing us or anything like that, but Miami and Pitt are both tough games back-to-back. Miami, very, very talented. Pitt, very, very physical. And so that's kind of an interesting kind of back-to-back there. Florida State, honestly, at this point, if they can go 1-1 in that, I think you'll be pretty happy. Pitt started 7-0 last year. They finished 7-6, so they were certainly cold to start the year. Hopefully that carries over. I feel like I'm just whining and moaning and complaining at this point, but I do hate 2 Friday games. I don't know how you guys feel about Friday games, but I hate them. I absolutely cannot stand playing on Friday. I think it's stupid. I think it's dumb that Florida State has 2 Friday games and BC, Duke, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Pitt, and SMU, 6 other teams have no Friday games. And Florida State plays in 2 of them. Other teams in the conference, like Louisville, has 2 weekday games, a Thursday and a Friday. Other teams also have 2. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you would put still with a 2-win season, your biggest brand, your premier brand of the conference that gets the most eyeballs, that you would put them on a Friday as opposed to putting them on Saturday where they belong. And then you give BC, Duke, and Georgia Tech, Stanford, Pitt, SMU no games on weeknights in the ACC. That's a little bit annoying to me. Again, I just don't love the Friday thing. Clemson's AD actually wrote an email, was like, hey, we're playing 1 max. We're not playing extra Friday games. It's part of their lawsuit, and kind of came out through all the litigation. So I don't love that. I do think, some positives, right? We whined and moaned and complained, but I do think some positives. I think you've got a really good chance, and we mentioned this on Sunday when we talked about it, but I think you've got a really good chance to start this year 3-1 and to get out of September with a winning record. Obviously, the Bama game is going to be incredibly tough. We dropped a video on that last night, so go check that out. But East Texas A&M, a bye week, Kent State, you should be, if you're not 2-1 through that point, I think Norvell's getting fired. So, 3-0 would be amazing. If you're not 2-1 there, we've got massive, massive issues. And then at UVA on a Friday, I don't think that's incredibly challenging. I don't think that's incredibly, from a location standpoint, like a difficult place to play. I think UVA is okay, serviceable. They played Clemson tough for a half and then kind of got blown out late. They blew a big lead against Louisville. I do think that UVA is very beatable, and I think you've got a really good chance to start out 3-1. And should you lose to Miami as well, you've got Pitt at home, Stanford, and then Wake. I think you've got a really good chance to go 3-0 in that stretch as well before a really tough November. And so, optimistically, this is not a full schedule preview. Say you lose to Bama and you're 3-1. So you lose to Miami, you're 3-2, but you win your next 3 games. You beat Pitt at home, you should beat Stanford on the road, and you should beat Wake at home. You go into that last 4-game stretch at 6-2, right? That's pretty good, right? If I offered you, after winning 2 games last year, I think the first 2/3 of this schedule set up pretty well for you to start out 6-2. Could you be 5-3? Could you be 4-4? Yeah, anything's possible. Could you be 7-1? I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid just yet, but sure, right? You could upset Miami or Bama. There's no doubt about it. Both of them will be favorites when their kickoff starts, unless Miami has just had a disastrous start to their season. If they lose to Florida and Notre Dame, then maybe you're a slight favorite against Miami. But you've got a really good chance to go into that Clemson game at 6-2. I think you can beat Virginia Tech at home. And then if you're just looking at the rest of the games, at Clemson, at NC State, at Florida, if you can find a way to win one of those, you can get to that 7-8 win mark. So I think this schedule sets up with a lot of your tougher games late. I know you play Miami and Bama early, but question marks around Bama, question marks around Miami without a doubt. And so there are a lot of easy games early to where you can stack wins and hopefully stack confidence, stack playing well. Your team, hopefully, as it has gelled together over the year, has improved. And if you can knocking off Clemson is going to be tough. I think that's the toughest game on the schedule. But if you can beat a Virginia Tech and then just split with NC State and Florida, I think you can get to 8 wins. Now, you got to take care of business, right? You can't be dropping a game against Pitt. You can't be dropping a game at Stanford or at UVA. You need to take care of the games that you're supposed to win. But I do think the schedule sets up in a way that you can stack some wins early. And then if you've gained some confidence, if you're 6-2 with 4 games left, you could certainly knock somebody off to get to 7-8 wins. If I offered you right now to start the year 6-2, I know nobody wants to lose to Alabama. I know nobody wants to lose to Miami. But if I offered you right now to start the year 6-2 and have a chance to get to that 7-8, I mean, even 9 if you somehow beat Clemson, but have a chance to get to that 7 or 8 win mark coming off of a 2-win season, I don't know how many people would say no to 8 wins at this point, right? I think Vegas is setting the line at like 6.5. If you were to beat that by going to 7, if you were to exceed that even more by going to 8, I think you'd be pretty thrilled. If you had 8 wins going into the Florida game, like if NC State was the team you knocked off and you had 8 wins going into the Florida game, how much excitement is there around that? Feels like every time we play Florida, that game just ends up being a blowout one way or the other. Nobody's ever, I mean, I know that we played them fairly close. The year Jordan was hurt, I know that we played them fairly close the Anthony Richardson year. But it feels like that game could have some meaning, whereas if you go into that thing at 5-7, 6-6, you're kind of desperate in that game. Who knows? That seems pretty uphill, pretty tough. Those are my schedule thoughts. I'd love to hear yours too. Feel free to hit the comments. Let me know what you think. But I don't think the ACC necessarily did us any favors. At the end of the day, as I said at the beginning, I don't love the Friday stuff. I don't love the buys. I don't love the placement of NC State, but I think it sets up well enough for you to have some success early. And last year, the team was so bad, the schedule didn't matter. But the schedule was tough. You played 11 teams that went to bowls and then a really bad Charleston Southern team. The schedule is easier this year. It sets up a little easier this year. I don't think you'll be super far behind the 8 ball like you were last year, just chasing wins. I think there are some advantages to this schedule. I would like to hear your thoughts, though, down in the comments.